Many parents acknowledge that experiencing the disappearance of a child is an unimaginable nightmare. However, consider the harrowing scenario faced by the Fandel family, who underwent this devastating ordeal not once, but twice. Their children vanished without a trace. The unsettling events transpired during the late hours of September 5 or the early morning of September 6, 1978. In the quiet town of Sterling, Alaska, situated approximately 220 kilometers south of Anchorage, the state's largest city, 13-year-old Scott and 8-year-old Amy disappeared from their home. The perplexing mystery surrounding the disappearance of the Fandel children has confounded law enforcement for over 4 decades. How could 2 children vanish from their home without a trace? As of 10:30 p.m. on September 5, 1978, Scott and Amy Fandel were innocently playing in their room, preparing for dinner. Yet within 4 hours they vanished, never to be seen again. Where did they go? What could have transpired to lead to their disappearance? Despite the exhaustive efforts of the police, spanning thousands of hours in pursuit of leads, little progress was made. A former Alaska officer lamented that they meticulously combed through the tall grass, searching for the children's footprints like grains of sand, but never came close to locating them. By way of backstory, Scott came into the world in 1965, a product of Margaret Skonfelder's initial love with a man she preferred not to discuss. Their relationship endured only a few months before they parted ways. With no interest from the father in establishing a connection with his son, Margaret took on the responsibility of raising him alone. Approximately a year later, Margaret relocated from Illinois to Alaska, where she crossed paths with Roger Fandel. They developed a relationship, leading to marriage, and in 1970, Amy was born. Despite Scott not being Roger's biological son, Roger consistently treated him as his own. Taking the initiative, Roger proposed that Margaret officially adopt Scott, granting his stepson the Fandel family name. For a few years, the Fandel family experienced a period of contentment. However, in 1975, Margaret discovered Roger's infidelity. To cope with the ensuing grief, she turned to alcohol, intensifying the familial challenges. 6 months later, Roger departed for Arizona with one of his mistresses. Margaret endeavored to regain composure after her husband's departure. Despite Roger's continued financial support, it proved insufficient. Margaret secured a job as a waitress to make ends meet. In an effort to trim housing expenses, she and her children relocated to a modest house on the outskirts of Sterling. Previous events. In 1978, Scott Fandel, at the age of 13, displayed a maturity and intelligence beyond his years, as attested by those familiar with him. He dutifully handled household chores and often took care of his younger sister in his mother's absence. On September 5, 1978, the Fandel children experienced a joyous day with the arrival of their mother's sister, Aunt Kathy Skonfelder, who had traveled from Illinois to visit. Scott and Amy cherished their aunt, and the prospect of her staying for a few weeks filled them with happiness. Kathy arrived in the afternoon, spending quality time with Scott and Amy. After dinner at their cabin, the 4 of them headed to Good Time Charlie's bar. While the kids enjoyed the arcade, their mother and aunt engaged in conversation over beers. Around 10 p.m., Margaret and Kathy escorted the children home and then proceeded to another bar themselves. Before leaving, Margaret advised the children not to stay out late, and Kathy, with a touch of humor, asked them to lock the door. Scott chuckled at this, knowing that the interior lock on their cabin was a bit finicky. Situated at the edge of a birch tree grove, the Fandel house remained inconspicuous from the road due to the tall trees. However, a bright lantern on a pole illuminated the yard and most of the driveway. Their closest neighbors, Nancy and Bill Lupton, lived about 180 feet away on the other side of the grove, with 5 children of their own. The Fandel and Lupton children were close friends, frequently spending time together. After Margaret and Kathy dropped off Scott and Amy, the children converged at the Lupton house to play. Nancy Lupton recalled that Scott and Amy were in high spirits that night, elated about their aunt's visit. The children played together, but their exuberance became a bit too noisy. Around 10:30 p.m., Nancy sent the Fandel children home. When later questioned about the evening's events, she described it as entirely ordinary with no hint of anything suspicious. A growing sense of unease. An intriguing observation caught the attention of locals driving past the Fandel house around 11:45 p.m. The lights in the house suddenly illuminated, yet there were no signs of cars or individuals nearby. Initially, this didn't strike anyone as unusual since both Scott and Amy had a fear of the dark, often keeping all the lights on in the house at night. What did raise eyebrows was that the lights came on over an hour after their presumed arrival home. Around 2 a.m., Margaret and Kathy returned. To their surprise, all the lights were off, and the children's beds were empty. Everything appeared in order except for a bag of pasta and an open can of tomatoes on the kitchen table. A pot on the stove was still on, and water was nearing boiling. It seemed Scott had begun preparing a late dinner, but got distracted. Assuming the children had opted to spend the night at the Luptons' house, as they often did, Margaret prepared a bed for Kathy and went to sleep. On September 6, Margaret rose early and was at the restaurant where she worked by 8:30 a.m. Concerned that the children hadn't shown up in the morning, she called the school to leave a message for Amy, informing her of a pending punishment for not coming home before heading to school. To her dismay, the school relayed that neither Amy nor Scott had attended. Growing anxious about the children, Margaret wished to leave work, but her boss refused to grant her time off. Disappearance. Meanwhile, Katie remained at home, growing increasingly concerned, especially upon noticing that only the Lupton children disembarked from the school bus. Her sister's son and daughter were conspicuously absent. Approaching the Lupton children, she inquired about Amy and Scott. To her distress, the two informed her that they hadn't seen them since the previous night. Katie, horrified by the news, promptly called Margaret, who hastily rushed home. In a state of desperation, the sisters commenced calling the children's friends. As the realization set in that no one had seen Scott and Amy throughout the day, Margaret decided to contact the police. This call occurred at 5:14 p.m., approximately 15 hours after the children's disappearance. Initially, both Margaret and the police suspected Margaret's ex-husband. Unreachable for several days due to vacation, their concerns were dispelled when communication with his relatives and neighbors revealed he did not have the children. Roger Fandel, despite his reputation as an occasionally wayward but generally amiable man who loved his children, promptly cut short his vacation upon learning of their disappearance. He returned to Sterling to assist in the search for Scott and Amy. Searches and leads. For the ensuing decade, Roger found himself at the forefront of suspicion in the case. Law enforcement entertained the notion that if he didn't directly abduct the children, he might have been enlisted to do so. However, over time, detectives discarded this hypothesis, realizing that his life was lived openly, making it challenging for him to conceal the whereabouts of the children. Complicating matters, there was a palpable animosity between Scott and Roger. making it improbable for him to orchestrate the kidnapping of both children. Teachers and friends regarded Scott as Amy's primary protector, suggesting that if anyone attempted to abduct the girl against her will, her older brother wouldn't have stood idly by. An intriguing clue emerged in the form of fired pistol casings discovered near the Fandel home. The challenge, however, lay in the presence of both old and new shell casings. Margaret couldn't account for them, speculating that the children might have found them somewhere. Simultaneously, volunteers and police, accompanied by dogs, combed the woods and surrounding areas in hopes of uncovering any trace of Scott and Amy Fandel. Yet it seemed they weren't merely lost, as no footprints were discovered in the vicinity. Given the case's location on the Kenai Peninsula, with the most accessible exit being by ferry, authorities meticulously examined all watercraft departing from there and scrutinized vehicles. Additionally, they shared photos and descriptions of the missing children with Canadian law enforcement to aid identification in case they crossed the border. Notably, the children vanished during the height of the oil boom, when the construction of an oil pipeline in Alaska was in full swing. The region teemed with unfamiliar faces drawn to the area for work from all corners of America. A plausible scenario considered by investigators was that someone overheard Margaret and Kathy at Good Time Charlie's discussing leaving the children home alone for a few hours. The police probed this theory as the most likely, attempting to identify everyone present at the bar on September 5. However, the sheer number of suspects and a dearth of concrete leads soon led the investigation to a standstill. A fake kidnapping. Speculations have circulated regarding the possibility that Scott and Amy orchestrated their own disappearance, with the boy intentionally leaving the pot on the stove to create the appearance of a kidnapping. However, the notion raises questions about the feasibility of children aged 13 and 8 staging such an event, and the uncertainties surrounding their intended destination. Growing up in a small Alaskan town, escaping unnoticed would likely involve collaboration with an adult. Some theories suggest that someone aware of Margaret's perceived shortcomings as a mother may have manipulated the children into running away. Alternatively, the worst-case scenario could be that Scott and Amy ventured into the woods, became lost, and tragically succumbed to the elements. Suspicion has also fallen on the Luptons, the last people to see the Fandel children alive. Questions arise. Did the kids even leave their house? Could an accident or tragedy have occurred during their visit to the Luptons, leading them to harm one child and potentially cover up the incident by harming the other? The Luptons killed the kids? A speculative scenario suggests that the children's perceived noisiness may have angered Nancy Lupton, leading to an accidental murder. The Luptons, aware of the faulty door lock at the neighbor's house, could have entered, placed a pot on the stove, and turned off the lights. Notably, the absence of signs of struggle in the Fandel house raises doubts about a potential kidnapping from there. However, the Luptons' motive appears weak, as killing neighborhood children lacks a compelling rationale. Additionally, with 5 children of their own, the question arises whether they could collectively keep such a grave secret for over 40 years. Selling or killing the children. Margaret's decision to leave her children unattended at home while she went to a bar with her sister raised eyebrows, even considering the more relaxed norms of the 70s. Compounding matters, Margaret faced financial struggles and grappled with alcoholism. The fortuitous timing of her sister's visit could be viewed as coincidental, but some speculate whether Margaret invited her over with an ulterior motive, perhaps to dispose of or sell the children. The account of the pot being left on the stove comes solely from Margaret and Kathy, raising doubts about its accuracy. One might question why a mother returning home to find boiling water on the stove wouldn't immediately inquire about her missing son and daughter. It seems natural for a parent in such a situation to check on the children and reprimand them for leaving an unattended appliance running. Furthermore, Margaret's failure to see her kids before heading to work the next morning adds to the suspicion. Some speculate whether her behavior suggests she had already sold her children to an adoption agency by then, and the visit to the bar served as a means to numb their grief or fortify themselves against the emotional toll. Sort of a conclusion. Numerous theories abound in the Fandel family saga, with Roger Fandel's relatives quick to cast blame within their own ranks. Accusations were exchanged between Roger and his uncle Herman, each suspecting the other of involvement in the kidnapping. Notably, law enforcement went so far as to excavate both men's yards, yet no evidence surfaced. Margaret faced harsh criticism from others, deemed a neglectful mother by some. Accusations were bluntly leveled, with claims suggesting she either sold or killed her children. Over time, the weight of the accusations took a toll on Margaret, leading to increased alcohol abuse and a deepening sense of depression. However, in 1980, a significant change occurred as she relocated to Iowa, where she encountered a supportive partner, managed to overcome her alcohol dependency, and remarried. In a 1988 interview, Margaret expressed enduring hope that Scott and Amy might one day return. Despite the hardships, she clung to the belief that her children were alive. Roger, interviewed around the same period, held a less optimistic perspective. He presumed the children were no longer alive, reasoning that if they were, they likely would have attempted to contact him. I hope you liked this story. Please don't forget to leave a comment sharing with your thoughts below. Give a thumbs up this video and remember to hit that subscribe button to stay tuned for more captivating stories. Thank you for joining us on this remarkable journey, and we'll see you in the next video.